Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in from wherever you are. My name is Eddie Mandhry, and I'm Director for Africa and Middle East at Yale University. We are delighted to have all of you here for this session, Leading for Change webinar. It's a series that we put together at Yale to elevate discourse on Africa on our campus by bringing distinguished leaders from across the continent and the region who are doing tremendously impactful work. So today we are absolutely delighted to have with us Oulimata Sarr. She is currently the Regional Director of UN Women for West Africa and Central Africa. Thanks for joining us, Oulimata. And hosting this event with me, I'm delighted to have Adeogun. She is Vice President of the Yale African Student Association and also a Yale College student from Nigeria. Ife, we're glad to have you. So first off, I'll hand over to Ife and she will read off Oulimata's bio and introduce Oulimata to the group and to everybody who's in. And also we will have after that a small conversation between Oulimata and myself, followed by a brief discussion as well with Ife and Oulimata, and then we'll open up to audience Q&A. So without much further ado, Ife, I hand over to you to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Eddie. Okay, so Oulimata Sarr was born and raised in Dakar, Senegal, and is currently the Regional Director for UN Women, covering 26 countries in West and Central Africa. She is a fierce advocate for the equal treatment of women in every aspect of life and the empowerment of young women. Oulimata is the jury president of the Cartier Women Initiative Awards Business Plan Competition for Sub-Saharan Africa. She is a founding member of Gender Champion of African 2.0, a Pan-African civil society organization that consists of young and emerging leaders from Africa and the diaspora committed to finding and implementing sustainable solutions to develop the continent. Before joining the UN Women Africa, Oulimata spent 10 years at the International Finance Corporation, IFC, and she has over 20 years of finance and development experience. She recently joined 75 African Women as the founding member of Women Investment Club of Senegal to provide long-term capital to women entrepreneurs in Senegal. It's an honor to have her here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ife. So to kick off the conversation, Oulimata, I'd like to ask a little bit about kind of the importance of education in your trajectory. You had the fortune, you were just telling me about being able to pursue a degree in the UK, distance degree, but also your first degree in Canada. So you're a citizen of the world in many respects, but I'm curious about your journey in education and how that played out. How did you choose to leave Senegal, for instance, initially before your first degree, and who were the kind of people who helped make that happen? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie, and your team for inviting me for this conversation about a subject matter that I'm so passionate about. I will tell you a little bit about myself, and I would like to share with the students a much bigger picture. So I was born and raised in Senegal. I did all my schooling in Senegal, and I left at the age of 17 to go and pursue my degree in Canada, thanks to my mom, who wanted us to be totally bilingual and thought that Canada was a place to go. And so when I got I graduated with my bachelor degree in finance, I came back to Senegal, and later on, some years later, I did my master's, executive master's with the University of Luton, that is now called University of Bedfordshire. But I really want to talk to the young people about education in a much broader setting. And for the feminists that are online, I will go back 25 years. In 1995, 45,000 women from around the world met in Beijing, China. And from that meeting came about what we call the Beijing Platform for Action. Anybody can find that online. And one of the critical areas of the Beijing Platform for Action, that feuille de route that the women of the world were supposed to achieve, education was one of them. You fast forward 25 years after Beijing, we are still talking about girl education in Africa. And I always ask people, what does Malala and the Chibok girls have in common? There are some people in the world, we call them violent extremists, that think that the scariest thing they can face is an educated woman, is an educated girl. Because if you are going to school and somebody shoots you in the head, it's very likely that you are not going to send your girls to school. If you go and you are, you know, in a school, and then, you know, 200 of those girls are kidnapped, it's very, very likely that, you know, parents will start to hold girls back home for safety. And I think the fear that they have is that the educated girl would be an emancipated girl, is a girl that will know her rights. It's the girl that will say, I need representation and I need resources. So education is critical in what we are trying to do. And my journey, I owe it to my mother. My mother was adamant that me and all my siblings have to be educated, whether you were a boy or a girl, because my bigger older brother Abdu is a graduate from Harvard, MBA. But you know, my mom did not care. She wanted everybody to be educated, equal chances, I would say.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. And I think you emphasizing the importance of education, but also some of the challenges, the institutional and legal frameworks from across the globe in terms of all the advocacy that women and communities around the world have championed, especially now in this moment, this time, which is a moment we're celebrating women's history. I think it's important to acknowledge all those efforts. And I stand on the shoulders of many strong women who contributed to me being here today. So thank you for pointing that out. And so when you were kind of thinking about your career, it's very interesting. I looked at your trajectory, and you've gone from private sector, you've worked with Ernst & Young, you've even worked with an airline, so you've worked in the airline industry, and you know, senior positions, executive positions. Can you speak a little bit about what your experience was like, kind of navigating the private sector, the corporate sector, but then also figuring out a way to transition into kind of the international organization and humanitarian and social justice work?
You know, I would like to share my journey with the young women and the few good men who are on the conversation, because maybe the key takeaway from it is that the trajectory is never a straight line. Yeah. When I was in university, just like all of you, I never felt really discriminated against. You know, I was on a campus, we had equal grades and equal recognition as any other young man on campus, and we had good grades, and we represented almost half of the students. You will only start seeing discrimination and having issues with being a woman when you join the workplace. And I'll tell you a story. When I started at Ernst & Young, I was doing quite well. So I was 23. And a couple of years later, by the time I'm 25, I'm head of mission. So I lead the team of auditors and consultants when we go to the client. And this is when you realize that the world is really doesn't see women as leaders, because those days I will walk into a room and everybody will only start talking to the men. And those men, very embarrassed, my team members will start looking at me, almost trying to signal to the client that I am actually the head of the mission. And I think my journey from auditing to the airline to even in finance at the World Bank, at the IFC, has a common thread. And the common thread is really being convinced that I can make a contribution on the continent. I think I always felt a proud African, that in whichever role that I can be, I'm a change agent and I'm a driver of progress. And I think in all my different roles, that's what I was driving. And I think it's so important that the young people today understand that, you know, from going from point A to point B is actually a zigzag. And everything that happened to me happened through, you know, serendipity, you know, concours de circonstances, we call it in French, where it really happens in a very, very unplanned way.
Interesting. Now, thanks for pointing that out. And I apologize on behalf of my gender for some of the things you might have experienced. The one thing I would ask about is, you know, in that journey, how important, or, you know, were there people who served as mentors, and is mentorship important to you, and how have you kind of engaged with this concept?
Yes, I think in every position, every job that I held, I had a person that took a special interest in me. And I would like to tell the young people that some of those people were men, white male, actually. It just shows you that your mentor can be anybody. It can be another African woman. It can be a man. It can be anybody that believes in you, that sees potential in you that you don't see in yourself. And I think my whole career was, you know, planted with those people who believed that I had the potential, who believed that, that I was a fast learner. Because some of the positions that I held, I even doubted myself. I'm like, oh my God, can I manage this multi-million-dollar business? Do I have the capacity? And then I remember David, who passed away. I said, oh my God, I think you are the perfect person for this. I think you have the potential. So you need that boost. You need somebody who says, you know what, I walked in these shoes and I believe you can do it. I think mentorship is critical. It's part of what I call my giving back. And whether it's a fireside conversation or even visiting universities. I mean, I don't know how many young people have invited me through LinkedIn for a conversation, and I take the time. I take an hour of my time. I connect and I plant the seeds. I'm like, maybe, you know, I will generate a few feminists. I will generate the activism. So I do it, and I think it's a form of with technology now. It's actually a form of mentorship, because a lot of people reach out. They want me to mentor them personally, and these days I know that I don't have the time to have a one-on-one with Ife, with Nadira, you know. But if I can, you know, through a conversation like this, leave them with a few nuggets of wisdom that will empower them, and then they take it forward, then I do it. I do it on a Saturday afternoon because I think it's important.
No, thank you. We appreciate that. And it's an important point you make about mentors coming from different places and spaces, different races and colors. You know, as long as they see that intrinsic potential in you, and, you know, serve as a champion, an advocate, someone who reassures you about your capabilities. Did you, kind of connected to that, did you find yourself at any point looking up to role models, and who were your role models?
So I will share, you know, a role model who ended up being a very good friend, because I would like maybe to tell the story of my journey through this whole gender activism, because I did not start as a, you know, gender savvy and gender sensitive person. It happens through a number of little events, I call them, you know, when the stars are aligning slowly. And I will share that, and then it will translate to the role modeling and actually even people who inspired me. One day when I was at the IFC, the regional director then reached out to me and said, there's a women's network in Asia, and I would like us in Sub-Saharan Africa to do the same. It's a, you know, we do our yearly talent review. In Africa, 25 of you have been identified as talent that we need to retain. And the Women's Network is always is a good way of putting you guys together and taking you through the journey of, you know, mentorship with vice presidents and things like that. And then I was asked to coordinate that. Yet another corporate initiative landing on your plate, you know, when you're very busy, and yet they call you to say, okay, I want you to do the fireside conversations for the year to come. So that's what happened to me with the Women's Network. I called the first meeting of the 25 talent that we were, and that was a difficult meeting. The women didn't want to do anything with it. They were not interested. They felt that they were being put in a box. I'm an investment banker. I bring $100 million deal. Why do I need a women's network to navigate, the IFC? And what about the other women who are not in the group? And we used to laugh. Do you think, Eddie, you're the man of the conversation, if men were selected, 25 men were selected as top of the top, and the institution decides to groom them, I strongly believe that the least of their worry would be who are the men who did not make it.
Right.
The women were so worried about the other women who did not make it, and how, and what was the criteria, and why them and not the others. And a lot of them pushed back. So they gave us some money and asked us to go on a retreat in Dakar. Those days I was based in Johannesburg. And during the retreat in Dakar, Susan Gituku, who used to be the vice president HR of Coca-Cola in Africa, is a Kenyan, took us through that journey and told us, 25 of you, when IFC make investments and advisory on the continent, at least one of you is at the decision table. And when you are at the decision table, you represent every single African woman that is not on the table. Because you're talking about infrastructure, you're talking about credit lines, we're talking about millions of dollars. So all of you, you have a mandate. Your issue is not your investment banker colleague, is all the African women who are not at the table. And for me, it was my aha moment. I realized that I was in a position of privilege and I should not waste that with little, do I have a promotion? Is the other guy next door having a promotion? And I think when we left Dakar, we were transformed. Because those colleagues now, some of them are still at IFC, some of them have left. I mean, on the 8th of March of Women's Day, they all reach out, oh, this is what I've done, this is how I'm organizing something. So we left really being totally aware that there was high expectation on us women, decision makers, and we should not take that lightly. And then it takes me back all the way to role modeling. So on our first Women's Day at the IFC ever celebrated in Johannesburg, South Africa, I invited a lady by the name of Wendy Luhabe. Wendy Luhabe, for those of you who know her, you should invite her. She's absolutely amazing. She, with a group of women in South Africa, started one of the largest investment fund called the Women Investment Portfolio. It's called Wiphold. And when they listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, they were worth $200 million. And it was 18,000 women post-apartheid that decided to put their funding together from 100 Rand to 1 million Rand and start investing in companies. And she reached out to me, we spoke, and we've been friends ever since. She's the one that first took me to the Women's Forum in Deauville in France. She said to me, you have to attend, it's a yearly event. You will meet all the like-minded women who are changing the world, from astronauts to Nobel Peace Prize winners. And, I would say she's an excellent role model, and she really pushed me, introduced me to the Cartier Women's Initiative. She was the former president. And when she stepped down, she said, you know what, I know this wonderful woman in Senegal. I think she'll make a wonderful president for this competition. And it was actually one of her advice. She says, women, never leaving an empty chair. If you are leaving any space, make sure that you give the space to another woman. Just don't walk away. And I think that was a perfect example of what she did, making sure that you pass it along.
Thank you for sharing those very powerful anecdotes and kind of seminal moments in your experience. And Wendy Luhabe, we've definitely flagged her. We'll make sure we try and connect with her to speak with some of our students. And also a tip of the hat to Susan Gituku. It seems like that retreat was a seminal moment in figuring out a way to actualize the notion of representation and how important it is to be at the table and to represent the interests of women from across the world and our continent. Thanks for sharing that. I just connected to that. I have a question, and then I'll hand over to Ife, who has, I'm sure, some burning questions he'd like to ask. I saw one of your posts recently about the ascendancy of Madam Samia Suluhu as the new president of Tanzania. She's now the only woman president from all the countries on our continent. How important is it, do you think, to have greater representation in political office, and not just in Africa, but in general? And so, what does that mean for Tanzania, for instance?
Your question is so spot on. Our gender agenda, I want maybe the young people to write it down, can be summarized in 3 R's. And those 3 R's are rights, representation, and resources. And the question Eddie is asking is about representation. Today, the research shows that it will take us over 100 years to close the gap in representation. And if I take the continent of Africa, if you take the family picture of the African Union meeting, heads of states, you will not find a single woman on that picture. Today, with Samia, the new president of Tanzania, at least we will have 1 woman on that picture. We celebrate them. We celebrate her. We celebrate Ngozi. We celebrate all the women who are moving the needle and shattering what we call the concrete ceiling, not even the glass ceiling anymore. But I think it's also very important for us to say that we don't subscribe to the queen bee syndrome. We don't want 1 woman to represent, out of 54 countries. I think we want that critical mass of representation. And Chimamanda, I think, mentioned it in one of her conversations, saying, we're dreaming about the day where we don't have to be gender activists, where we represent half the population of this continent. Some people even say 52%. We want to be represented. Some countries are doing very well. If you take Rwanda, with parliament over 60% of women. Senegal has a quota law. So in Senegal, we have 42%. So some countries have made some deliberate efforts to have seats at the table, saying if you are a political party, if you have a list for any elected post, you will have to alternate your list, 1 man, 1 woman, 1 man. We call it the zebra list in Africa. And we believe in quota. I think it's critical because incremental change is not happening. Yeah. So men need to be pushed. They need to know that this 50%, you need to achieve it. Otherwise, you will have to lose something. I think it's very, very important. I think Tanzania, I'm going to watch Tanzania very, very closely, because I think for once we have a woman Muslim head of states. We had, Johnson Sirleaf in Liberia. We had Samba Panza in Central African Republic. We had Joyce Banda in Malawi. So we did have women heads of states. But I think she has a 4-year term, Samia in Tanzania. So she will have all our support. We'll be rooting out for her, but we would like to see more women, and we would like to see more young women represent the continent.
Thank you very much. So thanks for engaging me with these first few questions. Now I'd love to hand over to Ife, who will also offer some questions. Thanks.
Ready. Oulimata, you mentioned that so in the last few years, we've made a lot of progress in women's rights, and women such as yourself have advocated for other women to maintain their seats on the table. However, all of us have a mandate, no matter what seat or what table we're on. And I was just wondering, how would you what advice would you give us to advocate for gender equity in our daily lives?
Ife, I want to tell the young people that to come, to justice and gender equality at the same time. And that's what I do for a living. First of all, for any transformation that you want to achieve, whatever is the sector, and particularly now we're talking about gender equality, you need to address the issue of policy and norms. So you need laws. So if your issue is economic empowerment or representation or ending violence against women, you need a law. You need something that says, this is what we want it to be. Once you have the law and you're working very hard on changing the norms, because in Africa, social norms are critical, you have to address the issue of skills and capacity building. So that's your second pillar of any transformation. Who do you need to train? Who needs to understand what you're trying to do? Is it traditional leaders, religious leaders, public servants, civil society organization? Is it academia? So you need to really work on that capacity building pillar. Your third pillar of transformation is financing. Because I always tell young people, you always have these brilliant ideas. Who's gonna pay for it? Any idea that you have, you will have to break it down to the funding model or to the business model. So financing is critical. And we think that all the gender equality issues, by the way, are underfunded. They tend to confine women to the ghetto of microfinance, I used to say. And there's nothing micro about the women, and I think we all agree. The fourth pillar of your transformation is access to information and access to market. Access to information, very critical. If you have a law and nobody knows about it, nobody would be accountable for it. So making sure that the information is available, disseminated, and these days with technology, it can be everywhere. I will add to that last pillar of transformation, particularly in Africa, I will add the pillar of infrastructure. You need energy, you need water, you need roads, you need technology. Those are the 5 things that are going to move the needle: policy, skills, financing, access to information and market, and lastly, infrastructure. That's how we move the needle. And in all that ecosystem, gender equality is at the center of it. And I just want to maybe brief the young people on what we call the Sustainable Development Goals. Because the world is talking a language that you guys need to understand. In September 2015, the world agreed on an agenda. That agenda is called the Agenda 2030. That's the deadline. As part of that agenda, there's 17 sustainable development goals. I'm actually wearing the pin today because I wanted to talk about it. And out of those 17 goals, if you only have to remember one, it has to be number 5. And number 5 is gender equality and women empowerment. Because without number 5, I am convinced that none of the other goals can be reached, whether it's zero poverty, education for all, health for all, peace, climate, you name it. And the 17 is partnership. You need women at the center. So when we draw the SDGs, we put the number 5 in the middle, and then it's almost like a sunshine, because we believe that women are catalytic. So it's extremely important that you young people drive the needle all the time. And I always tell you also when I speak to you, you have to choose your thematic area. How do you eat an elephant? Because gender equality and women empowerment is an elephant. And you cannot eat it all at once. So you have to choose your area of interest based on your background, based on your studies. I am more comfortable dealing with issues of, economic empowerment because maybe I have a background in finance. I have some colleagues who only deals with issues of political participation. How do we get women on voters' rolls? How do we make sure that women are observers? How do we make sure that women are candidates? I have colleagues who only deal with that. So some of you may say, I'm interested in politics, and my entry point into gender equality and women empowerment is women political participation. I have colleagues who only deal with economic empowerment, social protection, entrepreneurship, climate smart agriculture, type of financial instrument, equity, guarantee fund, lines of credit, macroeconomist, gender responsive budgeting, data. I have colleagues who only deal with that because that's their area of comfort. I have colleagues who only deal with issues of women, peace and security and humanitarian action. How do you deal with women in situation of crisis? So those colleagues of mine work on what we call the 3 Ps: prevention, protection, and participation of women in peace processes. And there's a very famous Security Council resolution called Resolution 1325 that really sets the tone on the role of women on building peace. I'll give an example of my colleagues working on humanitarian action. Today, there's a tsunami, or women are displaced in Maiduguri in the north of Nigeria. I went to the refugee camp. And you will notice a few things. On humanitarian crisis, people will pack food, rice, sugar, anything that people will need now. Any of the women who are on this call today know that there's an essential item not to forget, which is panty liners, because in that refugee camp, you will have thousands of women having their periods every day. But if the packer is a man, he would not think that that's important. He will actually even forget. In humanitarian action settings, we realize that if we don't go and check the humanitarian camp, you will find out they might not even have a separate toilet for women. And then young girls get raped at night trying to get to the bathroom. So in all humanitarian setting, you have to make sure that the women and girls and the toilets and everything is well, divided, lit, 24 hours a day, so that women and girls can be comfortable going there. On humanitarian action, my colleagues are dealing with second chance education. While all those people are displaced, how do we make sure they are able to exit with a skill, or be able to to sustain their lives with some training? So I have colleagues who only deal with humanitarian action. I have colleagues who only deal with issues of violence against women. Violence, talking about child marriage. In our continent, child marriage is a big problem. People get married off at 12, 13. A girl that is, married off at 12 or 13 does not go to school. I remember we once met the president of Niger, Mr. Issoufou, and he says, in my country, if a young girl is married off, her wedding present is a donkey. Not furniture, not jewelry. It's a donkey, because one of her primary roles is to fetch water for the rest of her life. So child marriage is a big problem for us. Harmful traditional practices, FGM. Women and girls are still being cut, especially during the COVID. Because if they don't go to school, people marry them off. If they don't go to school, you can, mutilate her calmly. It will heal in the next 2-3 weeks, and maybe they will not find out at school, because it's almost at school that they felt protected. In countries like Cameroon, they are ironing the young girls' breasts so that they don't come out. In a lot of cultures in Africa, being a widow is a big problem. They will lock you up with almost no food for a month in some countries. And the last country that was the most shocking was that if your husband dies, the water in which he was washed, you have to drink as part of a harmful traditional process. Can you imagine if he died of COVID or Ebola, all the consequences? And everything I'm saying to you today, you always have to think about the cost of it. Because if you make sure that the girls are all married at 12 or 13, that's a whole group of people that are not educated. And then you are still competing with the world and wanting to have skilled labor. So there's a huge cost of gender inequality on the continent. And you will see that the most prosperous countries are the countries that are the most equal. And I will let you ask more questions, because I can carry on for the next hour.
Thank you very much. No, I completely agree with everything you said. You mentioned obviously the 5 pillars and the SDG goals, and basically working towards each of these things to actually make progress in our societies. But you also mentioned the cultural norms and the gender norms, such as child marriages and other things that happen. Like I'm from Nigeria, and I've seen Northern Nigeria, and one of the pillars you mentioned was policy. And we've had a lot of policies try and be enacted to increase the age of legal rape, or to increase the age of child marriages, and we haven't really seen a lot of progress there. So how do you, as a woman, first make your voice heard, and second, actually make progress with things such as policy, which is so so bureaucratic?
Yes, so I think the step one of policy is dissemination. So once we help Nigeria get a law on rape signed by Buhari, we have to make sure that law is translated in all the local languages. so people are aware. But I also think that we need a coalition. We need a coalition of the willing. You know, I have a good friend that calls it that. You need all the civil society organization, women's group, youth group to be, you know, part of your agenda. You need your traditional leaders. Because in your particular country, we set up the Council of Traditional Leaders Against Child Marriage because we know they are prominent, we know they're respected, we know they're decision makers. We have to make sure that they also understand that child marriage has huge consequences on her. The child health who's pregnant at 12, she might die, might have fistula. So we also need to rally our men. At UN Women, we started a campaign called the He for She. The He for She, for me, is the most powerful campaign that we have going on. Because for the longest time, the women have been doing their advocacy alone. We need to have as allies strong men. Men who say, I support my child, I support my daughter, I support my sister. Those strong men who say, I am not going to sit on this panel that is all men. I have friends who would not do that, who go to Davos and tell them, you have not a single person that can talk about, not a single woman that can talk about energy in the whole world that you could invite. So I have some very good friends who are now, you know, who are male friends, who are fully gender sensitive and gender aware, who wear very proudly the He for She pin and believe in equal opportunity for girls and boys, and that will take a stand, and that will say, you know what, I'm a proud father, and I think that this is wrong, and I think that you should give equal opportunity. And every time that they see something that is not right, they are very vocal. And I think we need the men. I think we cannot do this alone. We need a planet 50-50, so we need the other half to help us.
Thank you very much, that is very right. And my last question to just round it up is, what advice would you give to students such as myself and the other people watching who are also, you know, thinking about a career in public service and possibly working in international organizations such as the UN?
I would advise, I would say 3 things. First of all, try your best to speak another language. I think that a lot of the position that I held over the years was the fact that I spoke both French and English. And if I'm in competition with anybody, then I'm able to say, at least I speak French. And if it's in a French-speaking setting, at least I can say I speak English. So advice to young people like you, you know, take your time, take your online classes. With COVID and everything, you know, leave COVID 10% better, I say to my daughter. Your 10% better is learn something else. And my daughter, while she's here, she's learning another local language with 3 hours a week with an online teacher. So I would encourage young people, first of all, to study and you know, get another language. The second thing I would say, you have to be on impactpool.org. Write it down. A lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn. I want to join the UN. Impactpool.org. Opportunities are there. You also have to register on unv.org. The UN volunteers are volunteers that are online, are volunteers that can come and spend a whole year with us. I encourage young people to do that, because then you will find out if you like it. Because a lot of people, you know, they see it, they think it might be glamorous, but I can promise you, I slept in very difficult places. I spent days sometime on missions without eating. And then the emotional toll is very, very high, because I remember when we went to Maiduguri in the north of Nigeria and met with some of the escapees, Chibok girls, and went into that refugee camp. You know, as an African, when we got into that car, nobody spoke. Because you're like, what do we need to do? What else do we need to do? Who else need to act for this to end? This violent extremism. We are the epicenter of climate change. You know, I cover the Sahel. I go and I see extreme poverty. I went with Amina Mohammed, who's the deputy of the Secretary General, Secretary General of the United Nations, and we went to the north of Niger in a place called Maradi. People are still asking us for water. The whole conversation is in Hausa when they translated to us was, we want water. In the meantime, the rest of the world just landed on Mars with a mission called Perseverance. We have a problem. The difference is so huge that when you go back to your office, you are like, we don't need incremental change. We need to leapfrog. We need to jump. We need to jump, and we need to jump as high as we can as a continent. We need good governance because some of these resources are maybe captured by an elite, a small group. And every day in my work, I see a lot of poverty, and I want to be I want all of you guys to be really change agents and drivers of progress, in that in every step that you take, every commitment, every job that you make, that you work on, is part of the larger agenda. And I think if we don't want Africa to be left behind, we need you. We need the young people to get involved. I want you to be activists. I want you to know that we are left behind because we have half the population that don't have land rights, that don't have representation, and they don't have resources.
Yes, well, thank you so much. I'm going to just hand over back to Eddie for the Q&A now, but that was really amazing. And I really loved hearing everything you had to say.
Thank you, Ife, and thank you, Oulimata, for the call to action, both for men and for women, in kind of working collaboratively and collectively to make sure that we safeguard our economic, social, political well-being. We do have a few questions piping in from the Q&A, so I'll kick off with the first one. It comes from Chika Ripley, and we'll mention that we have people tuned in from across the world, as far-flung as Mauritius and New Zealand. Wow. So there's many people who joined our conversation. So how do you think COVID-19 has affected women in the workplace? That's our question. And then the second question that's kind of connected to that from Lina Galao is, do you encourage escaping toxic culture, whether it's in your workplace, your home, your country? Do you fight for your position and disprove the stereotypes?
Let's talk about COVID. I think that's an important conversation.
Yep.
I want everybody on this call to know that COVID has affected women more than men. In 2020, if you had to take the Woman of the Year of 2020, is a health worker. Around the globe, 70% of health workers are women. Meaning that as we're looking at COVID going on, the frontline workers of that COVID are women. So women have been hugely impacted in the health sector. If you look at the socio-economic side of the COVID, I recommend all young people to go online and just type global gender COVID-19 tracker. It's work we've done with UNDP in analyzing all the countries that took some policy or decisions on COVID. And we looked at them. Were they, related to sanitary issues? Were they related to violence against women? Were they related to socio-economic issues? And we saw that around the world, 56% of all decisions that were taken during the COVID were linked to ending violence against women. Women and men, we have a problem. All of you, whether you are based in the US or anywhere else in the world, we all agreed that violence against women have increased during the pandemic. And actually my boss, our ED, calls it the shadow pandemic. We saw in Europe, hotels being open for women who were violated by their partners, some kind of code that you had to give at a pharmacy if you are in danger. I mean, really hotlines. We have a problem. And this problem is global on violence against women. So a lot of countries in Africa, if you look at the list of countries in Africa, took some decision. In South Africa during the lockdown, they had hotlines, shelters open. I mean, the whole infrastructure and services to help women during this problem. Socioeconomic, in Africa, all of us know that our economy is mostly informal. Women are the majority in the informal sector. Some of them are even cross-border traders. They go from Nigeria to Ghana, from Mozambique into South Africa. So we know that when we restrict movements, women who go to the market every day to make a living would be hugely impacted. And you will see that a lot of the recovery plans, all of the COVID response funding went to big formalized business. If I take the example of Senegal, you will see, the tourism sector, the hospitality, transport, men who were organized into business association actually captured most of that money. And what I'm saying is available. It's on the global COVID-19 gender tracker, where you will see all the decisions that have been made, and were they gender sensitive and were they not gender sensitive. A lot of countries confine the women to cash transfers, so mostly social protection. Some countries in the region that I cover gave food parcels, but women that we talk to, because there's a report called Impact Her that we did with the African Development Bank and UN Women, and Impact Her, the consulting firm. The women said, I need capital. I don't need a bag of rice. I need capital. I need a moratorium on my loans. I need something a bit more sophisticated than food distribution. So COVID-19 really showed us that the gender gap, the gender financing gap is real. That when we talk about ending violence against women, they think that we're just telling a story. But I think the COVID-19 put under the limelight something that we've been saying for years, that it's endemic, that it's a critical issue, and in all cultures and in all countries. That comes to segue into the question about toxic culture. My advice as a big sister, anything that is toxic in your life, you have to walk away from it. You have to work away from it. I think when we talk about the post-COVID, we're talking about building back better. Building back better requires getting rid of anything toxic in your life, including any toxic culture that you might be facing. Same with stereotypes. People can try to put me in a box. I refuse to be in a box. If today I wanted to be an astronaut, I don't think there's anybody who can tell me I cannot be an astronaut. And I think it's so important as you become mothers and fathers that you also raise your children like that. I have a young boy, and he came home one day and he said that at his school, some of his friends didn't want the girls to play soccer. And his answer was, I don't understand. The girls can do whatever they want. If they want to play soccer with us, they can play soccer. And I love that, because for me, I just raised a feminist. He knows that a girl can basically do whatever she wants. And it will really, it segues into what I saw on Twitter just before coming online about women basketball. Did you guys see that tweet? Because it's viral. It's 14 million views. It's right now, I think there's some kind of a huge basketball tournament happening. And then they showed the training side of the women basketball players and the whole training side of the men. Women had a couple of weights, and the men had a full-fledged setup of weights and whatever. And there's a young, female basketball player, I tweeted it this morning, who said, what, do you think that this is fair? And if you don't see a problem with it, you are the problem. So as we, end our conversation, I really want you, all of you who are online, to really put your gender lens on and to be fully aware that if you want to achieve social justice, if you want to push the needle on gender equality, you have to be fully aware all the time of what am I doing? Am I taking into account women and girls? Is this fair? Am I a mirror of society? You know, and I say the same thing to women, by the way. I'm invited to all these panels and I look, the 5 speakers are women. I'm like, no, we are supposed to give a much better example. You have to invite men who are part of this conversation with us. Otherwise, we are having this conversation in a ghetto and we are not influencing anybody, because all of us, we know the issues already. So you want Eddie on the conversation, you want Fred Swaneka on the conversation, because you want them to be able to influence people that they know. But we really have to break those silos, you know, young people, where you have a panel on gender equality issues and everybody speaking is woman. We know the issues. We need some new allies. We need private sector. We need government. We need men. We need much younger people. I think we need to just look at the way, almost at the world as a planet 50-50.
Thank you for some very powerful words. So we have a bit of time, just a few minutes left, and I'll combine 2 questions that have come in. One's from Arthur Amadi, and the other is from Laila Iraburiro from Rwanda, who I know. She's a Yale Young African Scholar alum who's also in Canada at the moment. So the questions are from Arthur is, as a young Nigerian in the diaspora, he's wondering about what he can do, him and his peers can do to be stronger advocates of the SDG 5, kind of a champion for women and girls. And you've touched on some of this in terms of breaking the silos. And then we have a question from Laila, and she says, first of all, they both thank you profusely for the great work that you've been doing. And she says, how do you address, what advice would you give young women aspiring towards leadership on the issues of racism? She also mentions the hindrances caused by sexism, but in particular, racism. Is this something you've encountered, and how have you dealt with that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, I love these young people because they have very clever questions. So racism, women and racism is what we call in our language intersectionality. And I know that. I'm a Black, African, Senegalese, Muslim, you name it. And I've seen racism before. I've seen racism when I was much younger, when I was less competent, when I was less confident. Because I think, based on my experience, as I became more senior, I think people, are twice as careful. I also say that I've been very fortunate to work for 2 organizations like the World Bank and the UN, where there's a 0 tolerance for racism. I mean, people can lose their jobs over racist behavior, racist comments. So I think the way forward on dealing with racism is really to make sure that the policymakers, the people around you, your community have a 0 tolerance for it. There is no excuse, you can't defend it. Just like, the issue of rape. When they say no is a no, I think racist behavior, no is a no. In our institutions, for instance, they call it, race series. We bring scholars to come and talk to us about best practices, about policies in different institutions. How are we self-aware as leaders, as managers, as supervisors? Because if you work for the UN, the diversity is huge. There are people from every continent, and you have to be really self-aware that something that you might feel that, oh, it was just a joke, somebody will take big offense for it. And I think we are trained to deal with issues like that. But I think in a broader, much larger world, it's very, very important to have 0 tolerance for it. And if you witness it on either side, whether it's black, white, yellow, that you stand in your truth and be your authentic self and say that, you know what, I have 0 tolerance for this, and I think it's wrong. How can you be a stronger gender advocate? I think you have to choose your battles. I always tell people, don't spread yourself too thin. Choose your battles. I have colleagues and friends who only deals with issues of women in sports. I have colleagues and friends who only deal with women in tech, the STEM. How do we get more women? Choose what tickles your fancy. Choose what drives you, something that you are so passionate about that you will do for free. I am convinced that this job that I do, I will do for free. If I leave tomorrow UN Women for another position, I think gender equality and women empowerment is in my DNA. Whether, you know, in whatever position I'll be in the next few years, I will continue to drive it, because I think it will bring about prosperity, it will bring about social justice, and it will bring about development on the continent.
And thank you for those words, really important points that you make on just being a strong gender advocate, but also, you know, being, having zero tolerance for racism and injustice and bias and discrimination. I'll close with one last question that's connected to what I wanted to close with. So Sam Williams says, hello, Ms. Sarr. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask about how you maintain such a positive outlook and such radiance while having to deal with such difficult situations day to day. How do you encourage well-being during this time? And so my question to you connected to that is, where do you, how do you relax? What do you, what's your favorite musician or music that you're listening to from the continent or elsewhere at the moment? You experience, you're exposed to sometimes really dramatic and difficult environments and circumstances that you have to deal with. And so how do you unwind?
This is such an interesting question. And I thank you, Eddie and Ife, for not asking this question that they always ask women. And sometimes I refuse to respond. And I'll give you that, and I'll tell you how I unwind. I will do an interview on finance. At the end of the interview, they will tell you, so how do you manage your work life with your family life? And how do you handle your husband and children? They do that to Christine Lagarde. They do that to all the women. At the end of your most technical and expert-driven conversation, somebody will bring you back to the kitchen and say, so what's your favorite cooking thingy? So thank you. Thank you for not asking that question that, I tend to tell people, would you ask this, to the, I don't know, the president of Danone or somewhere? You would not ask any man how you work-life balance and, what do you cook for fun? But I unwind by spending a lot of time with family. I am so busy that I have the impression that unwinding still is about doing stuff that is gender related. And I'll tell you why. The Women Investment Club in Senegal is actually just an initiative that is also on my personal time. Because when I came back to Senegal 5 years ago, after 20 years away, living in Kenya, in Burundi, in South Africa, the women of Senegal decided to be part of the solution. Young women entrepreneurs kept saying, we cannot get finance, and we cannot get the adequate finance. And a group of women said, why don't we put together each $10,000? It became $1 million. And with that $1 million, we are giving equity to small businesses in Senegal. And the concept is the same concept as tontine, is the same concept as ususu in Nigeria. I'm sure it's called something like that in East Africa. It's just women putting money together to give patient capital to somebody. So I do on my free time. I do so many things in my free time, but I love music. And my favorite music, of course, is Youssou N'Dour. Youssou N'Dour that I met, I went to visit him a couple of days ago.
I saw a post of you and him. I think it was a campaign you were working on.
Yes, so, to celebrate the 25 years of the Beijing Platform for Action, this year in June, there's a big forum called Generation Equality. So you will see if you follow me on my LinkedIn or Instagram, you will see a lot of generation equality. And the generation equality is really rallying all these people who are change agents. We want Youssou N'Dour to be our advocate. and push the needle with us. The Generation Equality has action coalitions on climate, on economic justice, on women leadership, on ending violence against women, sexual and reproductive rights, because women need, family planning and contraception. No woman wants 9 children. When President Macron said that the African women, they make too much children, I haven't met in my lifetime a woman who wants 10 children. Ife, have you met a woman who wants 10 children? All the women that I've met said, you know what, a couple would be fine. But if they don't have access to contraception, that's what, leads to I met a woman who had 17 children out of her own body. Can you imagine? Who wants 17 children? Meaning you spend all your life giving birth, and I don't think it's fair. So Generation Equality is in June. I will share the information because a lot of the conversations are going to be online. So all of you who are interested on the issues can choose your action coalition and follow the conversation. And private sector is involved, government, civil society organization, academia, really all the people who think that we can bring about that leapfrog that I talk about all the time. We need to jump, and we need to jump high. I like to, my joke that I always said that if all the Chinese people made a jump today, we'll have an earthquake. We have more women than Chinese around the world. So together, if we jump, we can really, rock the planet.
Wow. Well, with those very powerful words, we'd like to say thank you very, very much, Oulimata Sarr, for a really engaging, kind of open and candid conversation about both your career, your experiences as a professional, but also some messages of encouragement and reassurance around how we can work collaboratively to make this world a better place. Thank you very much for joining the Leading for Change webinar. It's part of the Yale Africa Initiative, spearheaded by Yale University President Peter Salovey, to encourage greater discourse on Africa and refocus our engagement around the continent. Thank you, Ife. Thank you to all the team members who helped make this event possible, Nadira, Megan, but also a thank you to the audience, those of you who participated through the entire webinar. There'll be a recording of this event that'll go on social media. Until we see you again, farewell from Yale. Bye-bye.